Part 1. The Iron Dawn Cold. Winds crawl across the northern sea. The longships slice through mist like blades of shadow, their oars rising and falling in grim rhythm. The smell of salt and pine tar clings to wool and leather. Men whisper names not of gods, but of warriors' names that still echo through the sagas. These are the 10 most feared Vikings in history. Men and women whose very presence brought silence to halls, whose sails on the horizon meant death. Fear in the Viking Age was not born from madness but from purpose. To live as a Viking was to understand the sharp edge between life and legend. To fight was to carve your name into time itself, and some carved deeper than the rest. Part 2. Harald Hardrada. They called him the last great Viking king, Harald Sigurdsson, Hardrada the Hard Ruler. Born in blood and forged in exile, he learned early that strength must travel hand in hand with cunning. When Norway's throne slipped from his kin, Harald fled east, sword in hand, and found himself among the Varangian Guard in Constantinople. There, he fought under the banners of emperors and kings, commanding men twice his age. Coins of gold filled his chests, but what he truly earned was fear. He was said to be cold as the steel he wielded, never laughing, never hesitating. When he returned to Norway, he did not return as a man but as a storm. His fleet crushed rivals like driftwood. Villages burned where his banners rose, and when he marched south to claim England, even his enemies whispered that Odin's own fury sailed with him. At Stamford Bridge, his final battle, Harald stood tall, an arrow through his throat, yet still gripping his sword as the light faded. The age of Vikings ended with him, but his name would be spoken for centuries by those who remembered what true fear was. Part 3. Ivar the Boneless. There was no king's crown on his head, yet no Viking inspired more terror than Ivar the Boneless, a name whispered in both pity and dread. Some said his body was twisted, his legs useless. Others claimed his bones were like leather, supple and unbreakable. Whatever the truth, his mind was sharper than any blade. He led the Great Heathen Army across the green fields of England, a tide of fury that drowned kingdoms. Where Ivar went, cities fell and kings vanished. He had no mercy, no hesitation. He could wait months in silence before striking like a serpent. When he captured Ella of Northumbria, the vengeance was legendary. The blood eagle, carved upon the king's back lungs pulled wide beneath the sky, was not merely a death, but a message. To cross Ivar was to suffer a fate beyond imagination. Some said he had the calm of a scholar and the cruelty of a god. Others claimed he never slept. His laughter was rare, but when it came, it sounded like something ancient waking beneath the earth. Part 4. Thorkell the Tall. He towered above the shield wall like a pine in a field of saplings. Thorkell the Tall, warrior, mercenary, and legend among men. His shadow stretched long across England's shores, and even those who hired him whispered his name with unease. He led the Jomsvikings, an order of fighters bound by iron discipline and colder hearts. They fought not for kings, but for the weight of silver and the promise of glory. When Thorkell landed upon foreign soil, it was as though the sea itself had delivered a beast of war. His enemies found no pattern in his raids. One season he burned coastal towns for the Danes. The next, he defended England for the very kings he once sought to destroy. His loyalty was measured only by the heft of gold and the thrill of conquest. Chronicles described him as calm in the chaos of battle, eyes steady as others screamed. When he raised his axe, men fell like stalks before the harvest, and when he smiled, it was never from joy, but from knowledge that he had already won. Part 5. Sweyn Forkbeard. Before he was king, was terror. Sweyn Forkbeard, son of Harald Bluetooth, carved his path to the throne with fire. His beard split like the forked tail of a serpent, a symbol his enemies would come to dread. He learned early that fear was stronger than friendship. His ships struck not only coasts but hearts, swift, sudden, merciless. From Norway's frozen shores to England's green rivers, his banners carried death and command. He raided not to plunder, but to rule. When his fury fell upon England, it was as though the gods themselves had unleashed vengeance. Monasteries turned to ash. Silver flowed into his coffers until kingdoms bent their knees. And when he became King of England, the people learned that the hand that ruled them was the same that once burned their homes. His power was not in his sword alone, but in his patience. He struck when others slept, negotiated when others raged. The fork in his beard was more than ornament, it was prophecy. For where he divided, empires broke. Part 6. Cnut the Great. From the ashes of Forkbeard rose Cnut the Great, a son who inherited not only a kingdom, but a world trembling at the edge of his ambition. Cnut did not need to roar, his silence was enough. His fleets darkened the seas, his armies marched beneath banners stitched with ravens, and his enemies found themselves crushed not only by blade, but by order. He was the first Viking to master rule as he mastered war. England, Denmark, Norway bowed beneath his crown. He ruled through strength, through law, through something far colder than rage: control. To his followers, he was a god on earth, a ruler who tamed the storm. To his foes, he was inevitability itself. His name meant the end of resistance, the stilling of rebellion, the arrival of the new order. When Cnut walked the shoreline and told the sea to halt, it was not arrogance, it was reminder that even kings must bow to the eternal tide, and that he, for a moment, had stood above it. Part 7. Hastein. From the mists of memory rises a name that drifts like smoke: Hastein, a raider whose cunning was sharper than any steel. Where others fought with brute force, Hastein wielded deception as his blade. He led fleets up the twisting rivers of Francia, his longships gliding through fog like ghosts. Villages burned before they could ring their bells. Cities that thought themselves safe behind stone walls awoke to find him already within their gates. One tale tells of how he feigned death to enter a city, his men carrying him in a coffin, disguised as mourners. When the gates opened for the supposed funeral, Hastein rose from the casket like a spirit of vengeance, sword in hand. Whether truth or legend, it mattered little. The story itself was enough to terrify whole coasts. He was the storm that thought, the raider who planned, the wolf who smiled before he struck. In the age of blood and sea, intelligence was the rarest weapon of all, and Hastein wielded it without mercy. Part 8. Rollo. He came from the north as ruin, and stayed as a ruler. Rollo, a warrior so relentless the Franks gave him land simply to stop his raids, but what they gave became a kingdom Normandy. Before he wore a cloak, he wore scars. His raids crushed settlements along the Seine, his ships turning rivers into roads of conquest. They called him a giant, said his voice rolled like thunder across battlefields. To the Franks, he was a nightmare, made flesh, unkillable, unstoppable, inevitable. But Rollo was no mere destroyer. He understood that true fear came not from killing men, but from taking their world. He turned the land he once burned into the land he ruled, shaping the Normans into a people who would one day conquer even more than he did. The monster of the north became the founder of a dynasty. The blade became a crown, and the world learned that a Viking's power did not end when the raids stopped, it only changed shape. Part 9. Olaf Tryggvason. There are warriors who fight for gold, and there are those who fight for fire. Olaf Tryggvason fought for both the flame of faith and the roar of fame. Born amid chaos, raised among outlaws, he carved his legend through endless seas and foreign courts. His ship, the Long Serpent, was said to gleam brighter than dawn, its prow a dragon's head that terrified those who glimpsed it on the horizon. Olaf carried with him not only the sword, but the cross, forcing baptism upon the unwilling, converting with blade and blood. He believed himself chosen, and that made him dangerous. Under his banner, coastlines trembled. Villages that resisted were burned, those that submitted were spared. Mercy and wrath came from the same hand. At the Battle of Svolder, surrounded and outnumbered, Olaf fought upon his deck until there was nowhere left to stand. When he leapt into the sea, some said he drowned. Others whispered he swam away to return one day. A man like that could never truly die, only vanish into myth. Part 10. Bjorn Ironside. Some warriors are remembered for their kingdoms. Bjorn Ironside was remembered for his legend. He was said to be the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, though in the sagas, blood and story often mix until they are one. Bjorn's name carried across the seas long before his ships arrived. He was the echo of his father's vengeance, the living proof that destiny could wear a man's face. He raided not only the shores of England and Francia, but far beyond, sailing through the narrow jaws of the Mediterranean, striking where no Viking had dared. To the south, his name became a curse. Cities that had never seen the northern sky spoke of him in their prayers, as if the sound alone might ward him off. He fought like iron and endured like it. The sagas say no weapon could pierce his flesh. Whether armor, blessing, or rumor, no one could tell. It did not matter. Fear did not ask for proof. It only needed a name, and that name was Bjorn. Part 11. Freydis Eiriksdottir. At the edge of the known world, where the forests swallowed the sea, there lived a woman whose courage frightened even her own men. Freydis Eiriksdottir, daughter of Eric the Red, sister to Leif, and a storm all her own. When she voyaged to Vinland, across the dark waters into the wild lands of the west, she carried more than trade and hope, she carried fury. In one battle, surrounded and pregnant, she took up a fallen sword and stood alone as others fled. The attackers halted not for pity, but for disbelief. There she stood, her hair wild, her voice echoing through the trees, daring them to come closer. None did. Her defiance became the stuff of whispers. She was the spirit of the North, fierce, unyielding, defiant even in the face of death. Not all fear comes from cruelty. Some comes from the sight of one who cannot be broken. Freydis was that sight. The shadow of the North. When the last embers of the Viking Age faded, their names did not. They lingered in the sagas, in the wind that sweeps across the fjords, in the creak of old timbers at sea. Each of these warriors, Harald, Ivar, Thorkell, Sweyn, Cnut, Hastein, Rollo, Olaf, Bjorn and Freydis, carved their mark into time not through survival, but through legend. They taught the world that fear is not born from numbers, nor from cruelty alone, but from the certainty of will, the knowledge that some people, once set upon their path, will never turn aside. And so, when thunder rolls over northern waters, when the sea darkens and the sky lowers like iron, the old voices still whisper. Not prayers, not warnings. Just the names of the most feared Viking warriors in history.